The information and opinions presented in this podcast are based on research done at a particular point in time. The fields of medicine, surgery, psychology, etc. are constantly evolving as new studies and movements happen. Please take into account the year of any particular episode's publication, and as new information presents itself, we will do our best to release updated episodes on the topics. Listener discretion is advised for references to medical terminology of body parts. Unless otherwise stated, no one speaking on this podcast is a medical or legal professional and cannot provide medical or legal advice. Welcome to the Trans Field Guide. Today on the show I have Susan Blanchard-Jones, a wife and mother of trans individuals.
So I would say that the journey of everything began really when I started at Bright Divinity School. I was called to the ministry and I started going to Bright, and Bright is actually the place where I first started meeting gay folk. I'd probably met some, but I had never realized that they were gay. And so this is the first time that I'd ever really gotten to know them personally and become friends with them. And it started first with an acceptance of them as people. You know, when you're a woman in ministry, you get a lot of flack about being a woman in ministry because the Bible says women are to be silent in church. My thought was, well, if we've decided that that's outdated, why couldn't we also see that the passages that are about homosexuality are also outdated? And if we saw that the passages about slavery were outdated, why couldn't we see that the passages about homosexuality were outdated, even if there's no explanation other than it says that, but hey, we're going to say, yeah, but it was a different time. They didn't understand. So that's kind of the journey I went through at Bright. And then the next thing that I really noticed about some of my gay friends is that when they prayed, it felt like God's Spirit spoke through them just fine. So then I thought, well, that means there's no lesser than. God can bless anybody. God's Spirit can be in anybody. So it was that process really of coming to grips with that, and then also my husband being a very conservative person, and his view of the Bible is very literal. There was a lot of contrast with that, and there were other problems too. But anyway, we ended up divorcing, and in the process of that marriage dissolving, I was going through my own, I guess you would say, growth process of who I was as a person and going to counseling after my father's death. And that's when I thought that I discovered that I was lesbian. And I discovered all this in seminary, which to me is super hilarious. And so when I left my husband, I decided I wanted to try dating a female. And I thought I was dating a female, and no. So we had been dating, I guess, for a few months, and I don't know how most people feel in relationships, but I can always tell when there's a wall. When there's something they're keeping secret, or there feels like there's some part of them that's being held back. And this was at the same time that we were going to his church, which had a trans male pastor. And so I started to think, maybe this is what was going on with Ben. Maybe he was trans, and this is why there was a part of him he wasn't showing me. And so we had to talk about it, and I said, do you think you might be trans? And he said, yeah, maybe. And I said, well, then why didn't you tell me? And he said, well, I didn't want to lose you. And I'm like, obviously I can be with a guy. I was for 22 years. And he's like, well, I don't know. So anyway, he ended up going and talking to the pastor, and then he got a counselor, and then he decided he did feel that transition was the right thing for him. So by this point, I had already accepted my own sexual orientation. I had already accepted and known quite a few people who were a part of the LGBTQ community. But truth be told, when it comes to trans folk, that always made more sense to me than gay folk. And I can't explain why that is, except that I kind of understood why the spirit inside of you may feel different than what is being presented on the outside. And I never thought it was strange that somebody might want to transition. I had no idea there were trans men. I'd only heard of trans women. But for some reason, that never was a problem for me. I never had an issue with that. So when Finn decided he wanted to transition, my issues were only about our personal relationship. Here I was, somebody that I thought was a lesbian, and now I'm not going to have boobs anymore, obviously. We're going to have no boobs. And by the time he had this surgery, I felt like that was okay, that he didn't have boobs. It didn't bother me. Looked much more natural. Looked much more like, hey, this is who Finn should have been. Completely fine. So I really think that I accepted his transition pretty well. The difficulties that we had really had more to do with the fact that we were in an early relationship when he transitioned. Hormones are game changers. They change your behavior. He stayed in counseling for a long time to learn how to deal with his anger, which is something that can come out with testosterone. And there was just times when something he would be doing, I didn't know if it was because it was him, if it was because it was a trans male thing, or, I had no idea. And so I tried to reach out to people and find out, like partners of trans men. And I did not have a lot of luck with that. I didn't have, one person never really returned my phone calls at all. And the other one was really young, and she didn't really offer much help. She tried, but she didn't really offer much help. So I decided to go see a counselor as well. Just like Finn saw one and I saw a different one. And that helped me come to terms with my own sexual orientation, which turns out I'm not a lesbian and I'm not straight. And I kind of go back and forth with, what do I call myself? Am I fluid? Because I do think trans people are beautiful, and I don't have any problem ever. Like, obviously, I'm not going to date anybody else right now because I'm with Finn, but I wouldn't have a problem dating somebody who's trans of any variety, non-binary, trans man, trans woman. So probably by most people's standards, that would be considered pan. Some people consider that bi, but pan, bi, fluid. I had somebody one time say they were omnisexual. I think that's a pretty good term for me. But I tell people, like right now, because I'm with Finn, I'm finsexual. So that's what I consider myself now. And so the acceptance of him being trans was not really an issue, because I felt like that's just who God made him to be. And watching him going from such a timid, shy kind of person, someone who didn't put themselves out there much, and who is very fun-loving and charming and sweet, but the passion that they've had was kind of built up inside, and it had no outlet. And when he could feel free to be himself, that all that passion came out, and all this beauty that was hidden became outward. I mean, like, if you have the privilege of being around somebody who's transitioning, I mean, it is such a beautiful process, because they blossom in so many cool ways, at least the ones I've seen have. And that's what I got to be a part of, being in his life. And it's amazing. When my oldest came out to me as non-binary, I had already been with Finn for 8-9 years. So I had been a part of the trans community. I knew quite a few people who were non-binary. I knew quite a few people who were trans. So for me, that was not as much of an issue. But I had already struggled with the they pronoun. I still struggle with the they pronoun. I don't know if it's because I'm an English major. It's not because I don't see them as non-binary. Just have trouble saying they. Working on it. It's that habit, yes. You have to, and I try to use they even when they're not around. So hopefully that'll become more natural. But I know one of the first things that I asked them when they came out was, so are you going to change your name? And there was this, like, silence. And I'm like, hello? And they were like, well, I thought I might, but I didn't know if you'd be upset. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to be upset. That name never seemed to fit you anyway. When we named you and I held you, I'm like, this isn't right exactly. I don't know what it should be, but it's not this. And so, yes, change your name. Be yourself. And so that was pretty easy for me, the name thing. I think it probably helps that the first name was not named after anybody in particular. The second name was the middle name was a name that was after my grandmother's middle name, but I also have that middle name. And several other people in the family have that. So it's going on. It doesn't need them for that. Yeah. So, accepting them other than the they is probably pretty easy for me. But I will say that with non-binary, it can be tough when you've seen somebody as one gender all along. And then you see them, their mode of expression is sometimes the way it always was, and then sometimes it's not, to remember to do the they. Because when they look like they've always looked, or when I'm telling a story about the past when they were very gendered in appearance, that's harder for me to remember to do the they. So, but I'm working on it, because I have always told my kids, be yourself, be real, be authentic. Don't let anybody tell you who you should be. You know, the same kid got a tattoo like 2 days after they turned 18, even though knowing both grandparents were going to hate it. I drove them. Like, do I think that you should get a tattoo at 18? Maybe not. But you can't drive, and you want to do it, and you saved up the money. So it's your body. It's your life. So kind of how I am as a parent. As a person, really.
Like this episode? Tell someone about it. Resources referenced in this episode can be found in the show notes at transfieldguide.com. Stay safe, and remember that I'm proud of you.